Ja, herzlich willkommen, schönen Abend.
Welcome and good evening. Welcome to our discussion series on transitional justice. The Federal Foundation for the Study of the Communist Dictatorship in Eastern Germany and the Federal Government Commission for the New Federal States invite you cordially to this series, and it is already the 9th discussion in this series. Here we talk about international processes of transitional justice after tyranny and war. My name is Tamina Kutscher. I am the editor-in-chief of the media and science platform decoder.org. We mainly deal with Russia and Belarus, and the debates at the moment, particularly in Russian independent social media and exile media, show how important the topic of transitional justice is, particularly now when we have a terrible war in Europe, a war that is destroying much, particularly in Ukraine, of course, but also in Russia. And the question of guilt is also asked in these Russian debates at the moment. And also the question whether the lacking process of transitional justice is one of the reasons for what is happening at the moment. And of course, there is the question how a coming to terms with the past can look like when this war will finally be over, a reconciliation between Russians and Ukrainians. So you see, the series is very important, and we are looking for international examples. We will deal today with the question truth or justice, transitional justice in Africa. And we will look at a huge continent caught between ethnic conflicts, racism, and poverty. Many states are caught between international interests and national liberation struggles. The late 20th and the early 21st century were times of massive upheavals, and tonight we will ask the question how in South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt deal with these times, how they look at these processes, and which role the social question plays in developing and securing social structures and structures of the rule of law. We want to know how big the role of justice is in a successful process of transitional justice, and to what price a historical truth can be demanded, and also whether it is necessary to decide between truth and justice. I'm very happy that we have the opportunity to discuss this on the World Wide Web. Of course, you can ask us questions. You can send them to us either via email or via the chat. I will then ask them directly to our participants. Unfortunately, I have to start with a bad message. Our Egyptian participant, and these are the disadvantages of the World Wide Web, was not possible to join us due to technical reasons. So far, he is not with us on Zoom. We hope that he will appear briefly, but so far, I would like to welcome my guests from South Africa and Kenya. I would like to start with Khulu Mbatha. Khulu Mbatha is based in Pretoria. Dr. Khulu Mbatha is looking back to a long career in foreign relations until the end of 2021. He was the special advisor on international relations for different South African presidents already under Nelson Mandela. He worked in the foreign ministry. And on the whole, and due to his work at the African National Council, he spent 25 years abroad. He studied in Jena, speaks German fluently, and only after the release of Nelson Mandela and after the lifting of the ban of the ANC, he came back to South Africa. He participated in the negotiations between the white minority government and the ANC on the constitution of the country, and worked together with the ANC on the transition from a liberation movement to a governing party. He worked for the UN in New York. He worked at the Consulate General of South Africa in Munich. And we are very happy to have such an experienced advisor and expert with us tonight. Welcome, Khulu Mbatha.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamina.
Und ich begrüße außerdem auch Wachira Wahire.
And I also welcome Wachira Wahire. He joined us from Kenya. There seem to be some technical issues too at the moment. These are the disadvantages of the World Wide Web, but you can see his picture, and I hope that we will be able to see him live. Wachira Wahire is a human rights activist from Kenya. During the terrorist regime of Daniel Moi, spent some time in prison. He was tortured. Later, he became a member of the Kenyan Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission from 2010 to 12. And today he is the coordinator of the National Victims and Survivors Network at Kenya. At the moment, he deals with establishing national memorials and places of memory in Kenya, and also is committed to dialogue initiatives such as the Nelson Mandela Dialogue in order to come to terms with the difficult historical past. We are very glad to have him with us, and we hope that we will be able to see him and listen to him too. But tonight, I would like to start with South Africa with Mr. Khulu Mbatha. We asked our participants to send us their statement beforehand, and Mr. Mbatha says on the situation in South Africa: the best achievement for South Africa and our times was a negotiated settlement that allowed for a peaceful transition from an autocratic regime and racial oppression to a democratic order. Thereafter, the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process to confront the past laid the basis for reconciliation. End of quote. Mr. Khulu Mbatha, what would you say? You also mentioned that in your quote. What was essential for the success of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, now with hindsight?
Thank you, Tamina. I'm happy to join you this evening, and my fellow participants too from Kenya and Egypt. Hopefully they join us later. To viewers all over the world, let me start by answering your question by saying I have 4 points to indicate what was essential for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to succeed in South Africa. Number one is that we held successful negotiations. And when I say successful, it's always relative to the time. Now, successful negotiations meant that the background when we established the TRC had changed totally, both for the former oppressor and those who were oppressed. And what has changed, namely, was that we had a new flag in South Africa, totally new flag. We had a government of national unity, where the African National Congress and the National Party, meaning the party that was a majority with a party that was oppressing the people of South Africa. So then we had an interim constitution, and in the interim constitution, it was embedded there that we shall work for a new constitution in South Africa. 1. 2, and that there shall be a TRC, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So after the elections, we had this. This is a background, number 1. Number 2, we had strong leadership. We have people, personalities. First, President Nelson Mandela. This was a person of integrity who had spent so many years in jail, 27 years in jail, waiting for the moment to lead the people of South Africa. But we also had F.W. de Klerk. F.W. de Klerk was a leader of the National Party, but he was supported by his party to enter into negotiation. This was a strong leadership. But we had other leaders too. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who led the TRC. He was a strong personality. He was an anti-apartheid campaigner. He was a theologian. He believed in truth and reconciliation from a religious point of view. His deputy, Alex Boring, was an Afrikaner, a white person who had worked in government and had left the government during apartheid to say Parliament, the white Parliament, will not free South Africa, will not introduce freedom and democracy. He went out to establish a structure that started communicating with the ANC. Now, this leadership, the third point is that we had an act of parliament establishing the TRC. You see, it was not Mandela saying, let's have a TRC. We had an act of parliament, the new parliament. And then lastly.
Khulu Mbatha, Sie haben deutlich gemacht.
Khulu Mbatha, you made it clear that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did not emerge instantly. It took some years. At first, there was a new constitution. Then, as you said, there were strong personalities, leadership personalities, among them Desmond Tutu, who established and supported the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, who wanted reconciliation by showing the truth. What would you say today? Can there be a reconciliation at all? And what does it mean to reconcile?
So, let me also mention that this path is very controversial. It's not one of the easiest paths to follow. But South Africa, I'm happy that my country, South Africa, was the first in the world. Today, we have so many TRCs. We have over 1,003 such commissions all over the world, in Latin America, in Europe, in Spain, in Eastern Europe. South Africa was the first to do this. So it is controversial. It is not a moment. TRC, then you deal with it 1 year, then it's finished. No, reconciliation, truth and justice is a process. Now, I can say in South Africa, relatively speaking, our TRC was successful, but its success is being questioned today because of new things that have arisen. What was the mandate of the TRC? The TRC's mandate was that it will bring together perpetrators and victims of injustice, but it would also involve the public in coming together to find out where the truth is and find out which direction we should go. There was a purpose. The purpose was, of course, national reconciliation and forgiveness. This was a heavy task because the perpetrator had to say what he did, what wrong he did, and he had to be open and faithful, because in the process, at the end, there were a number of people who were not satisfied with the process because they said some of the perpetrators did not reveal the whole truth. But there were also those who were summoned to come to the commission and they refused. So, like I say, relatively speaking, the majority who participated got to know how their husbands, how their children were tortured and killed. The mandate of the TRC was also to give amnesty if it is satisfied that the truth has been revealed. There were also, this was the first attempt to deal with issues of justice this way. This was not a criminal procedure process. This was to try and bring the two sides together so that there can be forgiveness. And of course, this has its own limits because many of the people who were victims never saw the truth coming out of this process, and therefore they had reservation.
Und würden Sie sagen, nochmal?
And would you say, coming back to my question, do you think, has there been reconciliation taken place? And what does that mean? What does reconciliation mean?
Yes. Let me start by saying, as I indicated, yes, there was success. It was relative. Reconciliation, it means what Mandela said at his inauguration, that Africans, Indians, whites, and colors come together to start a new path for South Africa. We saw a new government of national unity governing this country. We have had in South Africa no uprising against authority. We have had no people saying they are oppressed. We have had a free press. We have had people expressing their views in the wildest way they can ever do. But all of this does not mean that people are satisfied with everything that took place at the TRC. All this does not mean that reconciliation has been achieved to an extent that we can say forgiveness exists among the formerly oppressed and those who were oppressed, because changes have taken place in the country. One of them is that leadership that introduced this path is no longer there. Nelson Mandela is no longer there. Desmond Tutu is no longer there. We have a new leadership which also looks at things quite differently. They might, they face challenges because the youth of today, they say, we don't see why we had to reconcile with the past, what happened to us when we still have unemployment, when the economy is still in the hands of those who formerly oppressed us. We don't see any development. We don't see what was promised as a better life.
Yeah.
These are the issues. Now they interact with what the TRC did. So that's why I say it's a process. We can never reach a point, and I've learned also for myself that this is a steeper road than it was when we're still opposing each other. And Mandela says in one of his quotations that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many, many more hills to climb. And this is where we find ourselves today.
Ja, also Aufarbeitung als ein Prozess.
So dealing with the past is a process, and as you've said that you quoted Mandela, and you said that you have to overcome the obstacles, that you have to take on this mountain. What about the social question in South Africa? Is this, let's say, a mountain or a problem you have to overcome when it comes to transitional justice, or do you have to climb this mountain in order to further process, to develop when it comes to transitional justice in South Africa?
Is interlinked. And I must mention here the fact that it is not only political parties that have climbed onto the platform to seek for justice for the majority of our people. The role of non-governmental organizations is very much important. Women's organizations, civil organizations, they are playing a very important role because they link to the agreements and that were made in the negotiations. They link this to the reconciliation process, and therefore ask very sharply as to, is there social justice? Is there social justice for us to have gone this route? Because we don't see the other side. The other side coming forward and say, we realize what happened in the past, and this is how we want to meet the people we once oppressed. During Desmond Tutu's, when he was still alive, he had suggested after the TRC that there should be taxation for all whites, irrespective of whether they supported or did not support apartheid. He suggested this will go a long way in order to address the social position in which many of our Black people find themselves in. But this proposal was rejected also by the African National Congress, because they thought it was asking for too much. But it made sense today to actually say Desmond Tutu was correct, because he was trying to advance some aspects of reconciliation, so that when things don't go right today, we are not able to point fingers at the past, but we can find common solutions.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much for this insight to the challenges South Africa has to face today, but also what you've achieved in terms of reconciliation, and that this still remains a process, of course. And I would like to build a bridge to Kenya, but there is a question from the audience, and I would like to raise this question, to read it. You say that apartheid and the social division has also created social divide or division. What about the young people? What do they know about this past? And do you think that you achieved, or did you pass on, where you successfully, or could you successfully pass on these results of of this commission. What about the youth?
Yes. The youth of South Africa today raises these issues very sharply. To give you an example, they say Mandela sold us out. They say Mandela did not negotiate properly. They say that the new South Africa, they say there is no new South Africa. The Rainbow Nation, as Tutu said, does not exist. And it is understandable. When you have a leadership currently that has not made an effort to explain to the youth what path we followed in the struggle to liberate South Africa. When the leadership of this country has not made an effort to try to bring an education system that will make it clear, especially to the white youth, that the past was not a rosy one because we oppress African people. Because the youth, the African youth, or in general we say Black youth, is questioning the youth, the white youth, which seems not concerned about things that affect society in general. They see them living a better life, much better than many of the youth, than many problems the Black youth is confronting among our people. It's not only education, it's unemployment, it's health issues, is independent from your parents and be able to start a new life. And to give an example is that the township life in South Africa has not changed from what it was many, many years ago. But they see the suburbs where most whites live have improved, have got electricity, have got better schools, and so. So they question, therefore, back to the question of, was reconciliation a necessary path to follow?
Ja, vielen Dank. Wir kommen bestimmt nochmal zurück.
Thank you so much. I think we will come back to this topic later, to this social question later, because this is also a question or a concern of the Kenyan youth, I guess. And Washira, I would like, first of all, I would not read your statement, but I would like to start with your biography, which is closely linked and intertwined with the horrible past of Kenya, the transitional justice processes in Kenya. Because in 1986, during the regime of Daniel Moi, you have been taken off, you have been abducted from the streets, and then you've been taken to Kenya's most, well, I won't say notorious torture chamber, the Nile house, and you have been subjected to horrific violence and torture. And you have been, people said you read Marx, and reading Marx was part of your studies, of your time at university, and then you have been sentenced to go to prison. In 1989, you have been released from prison, and it was a mock trial. And then in 1989, you went back to your family, and nevertheless, the life you had before wasn't the same. And in 2002, you went back to Nairobi under the new government, and you became the secretary of the National Victims and Survivors Network, and you started working and fighting for your compensation. And this has been a very long fight, and you had to go in front of court, and you sued the Attorney General for compensation for the torture and unlawful detention you had suffered. And this was a trial against the state, and then you've been rehabilitated and you received a compensation. So Washira, so you demanded compensation, and then you received compensation in 2009. What was it all about? Why was this compensation so important? Was it the right to justice, or was it the right to the truth? What was important for you, or the most important point?
Thank you very much, Tamina, for inviting me. And I'm sorry for the issues that we are going through in this part of the world. There's no power, but I'm trying to make some improvements. Coming back to your question, is that we started a process of documenting the victims of the Nile House torture chambers way back in the year 2000 during the regime of the dictatorship of Daniel Arap Moi. So that's when we started a process of actually documenting, getting to know who were these people who had been arrested, detained, tortured in those dungeons. And that is as far back as it started. A group of us, we were 5 of us as researchers. We started going out into the field. We were using a source document which had been published by the Amnesty International in July 1987. They had tried to list down those people who had been illegally tortured, subjected to torture, illegal arrests, tortured, and imprisoned. And so that was our source document. And now we wanted to establish where are these people many years down the line. And that is how it started. So fast forward 2 years later, there was a regime change when Daniel Arap Moi was not running for re-election. And so we had that moment, which is referred to as a transitional moment. And now that is what now brings a problem in my understanding of transitional justice, because the moment you miss that moment, then the whole process becomes problematic, because it cannot be transitional justice infinitely. You know, now we are talking about so many years after 2002. All conditions were very good because there was an incoming new regime and there was an outgoing the dictatorial regime. But now that's when the idea of establishing a Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission process started after the regime change. And let me point out at this point that we borrowed a lot from South Africa. Like my colleague has just said, they were the first country to establish a Truth Commission. And so even Kenya had to rely on experts from South Africa to come and actually tell us more about this new thing, new kid on the block called transitional justice. So our process started with a task force, which was chaired by Professor Makau Mutua, which went through the country seeking the views of Kenyans to get to understand whether is it necessary for the ills of the past, the violations of the past, the historical injustices of the past. Was it the right time to go and actually dig out some of this and establish the truth about what happened? And so in 2004, the Makau Mutua task force completed its work, and it made recommendations that, yes, Kenyans, 90% were for establishing or going back to seek out the truth and to establish a Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission. So that did not happen. Although the government accepted the report of the task force at that time, it did not happen. So the conditions to establish a task force came by again 5 years later, when after the post-election violence of 2007, 2008, that is when the country almost came to a standstill because of the election disputes. That's when now there was a mediation process, and this mediation process, which was chaired by the late Dr. Kofi Annan, there were several components of the negotiations. First to establish what was this cause of violence every 5 years. What is wrong with our electoral process? Then another component was to establish who were the people who were responsible for the violence which killed almost over 1,300 Kenyans and caused the internal displacement of over 500,000 Kenyans. So, our power has come back. So I don't know whether I need to switch back to the laptop, or do I continue like this? Because electricity has just come.
Machen Sie so weiter. Machen Sie ruhig.
Just continue like that. It works fine.
Okay, fine.
Everything is fine. We won't change anything now.
Okay,
but I've
fine.
got a question right away.
Yes. Okay, fine.
You just explained the long strainful work in order to start the process of finding justice, and the process that was prevented and that stopped several times. The question to you personally: you also were a victim of the Moi regime. What did it mean to you personally that this process started? And how far was it important to you personally to get a compensation and also to get the right to truth?
Okay. What I need to say is that first, the idea was to be vindicated that after Moi went, there was the torture chambers were opened for the first time to the public, and so it became something new. People did not believe that those torture chambers used to exist. So the reason we started the process of documenting is to put some real faces behind the victims who had actually gone through those torture chambers, and secondly, we also realized, and we were advised by the lawyers at that time, that yes, we had a constitution at that time, and it had been grossly violated, abused, whereby the torture was not allowed in the constitution, but we were still tortured. And so that is how it came that we decided to go to court. Our first area port of call was actually through our judicial system, whereby now we wanted to sue the state for having tortured us against the provisions of the constitution. So we wanted to establish that beyond any doubt that yes, this is what really happened. And in the process, that's when the matter of compensation came out, that because the court found out that most of us were tortured and against the provisions of the constitution. These were constitutional issues, and the state had to be punished by being forced to pay some monetary awards to the victims that had been tortured by state operatives, the state police.
Sie haben ja dann auch eine Entschädigung erhalten, wie schon
You then also received a compensation. You received your compensation 2009, 20 years after you were released from prison. And then it took even longer until the Truth, Reconciliation and Justice Commission in Kenya was able to start to work. You became a member of this commission, and during your work, you interviewed former torturers and even those who tortured you. What did this mean to you personally when you talked to the people who tortured you? What happened? What was happening inside of you when you did that?
This was in a way I personally also wanted to understand exactly what was going on in the minds of the torturers. Why were they doing what they were doing at that time? And so that's how I went out of my way. Me and another colleague, we sought out a few of the living torturers at that time. And in fact, one of them, we even invited him for a cup of coffee. And we sat in a hotel, and we were asking him why was he doing what he was doing more than 20 years before that time. At this point in time, this guy was had retired from the police service, and his work had finished. So he was just an ordinary Kenyan. He had been used by the state and dumped by the state. So he was a very miserable person at that time. And that one made me pity him, because his admission was that he could not have avoided being seconded to the torture squad as a police officer. So when he was sent to the squad, he had to do as he was being ordered by his bosses. And for that reason, he said that yes, he knew what he was doing was bad, but he was under strict orders that he had to do what he was doing. And it is for that reason, me as a person, when I listened to him talking, I started pitying him, and actually even made a personal decision of actually forgiving him. And you would be surprised that even after that, we became friends. In terms of, like, we could meet because he was always hanging around town, and sometimes he didn't have even fare to go home. And then you feel pity for him, because now our roles had changed. When we were being tortured, we were being forced to undress, to stay naked, and he was there, very powerful. And now many years later, he's there. We are both dressed up, but he's financially very incapacitated. He's lamenting that he doesn't have money. So for that reason, myself, and not to answer that question of forgiving, it was a personal decision that I did. And I did that because I felt that he was not doing his own bidding. He was actually being forced to do by his bosses. So the other thing about my experience is that I also came to understand more about the state under Moi. Because that state had become like all dictators do. They become paranoid, and they see enemies in every corner. And in order to stamp their authority, they use violence against their own people. And that is how now, those are things which I had not even understood. In fact, going through university, I had not understood what a state is until I became a victim of the state. That is when I knew what it means to be.
Das Interessante ist ja, dass sich die Rollen umgekehrt.
It is interesting that the roles changed the moment that you talked to these people. Yeah, you remained his victim, but you started to pity your torturer, because he also seemed like a victim to you, and you were not in the role of a victim any longer, and you knew his truth and his story, and you were able to forgive. Would you say that this moment of forgiveness is necessary in order for a society to develop further? I mean, this is an incredible example. You even became some sort of friends. And what means reconciliation to you? What does reconciliation mean to you?
Reconciliation to me, I understand it as a way of having to accept what happened, and then coping to live with that reality. That you understand, yes, you know the truth about what happened, and then after you know the truth, then you are able to live with that truth. And in terms of the term reconciliation, I think this is more or less a personal decision for me, because although I was able to forgive, but I did not forget. So you can forgive, but you don't forget. And having said that, that is how we've been now trying to bring a closure to this process of what happened to us by getting into another component of transitional justice that is called memorialization. And now that is why we've been trying to fight for the opening of the former torture chambers to the public, so that they can become accessible to anybody who would want to go and visit those torture chambers. Just like it happens in the John Vorster Square in South Africa, the Stasi prison in Berlin, which I've visited both of them. We also want a similar, because if it is done in Kenya, then people can begin to learn about their past and also to reconcile with that past. And for that reason, they'll have started on a road to personal healing and also knowing the truth, and also some kind of peaceful coexistence with the torturers or the violators of your rights. So personally, I think that that's a personal decision. Some of my colleagues say they cannot forgive, but me, I've already made that decision, but I've not forgotten what happened until we are able to secure a memorial remembrance. Yes. Yeah.
Das ist ein sehr wichtiges Stichwort.
This is a very interesting and important aspect you just mentioned. So forgiving, but not forgetting. Now I would like to read your statement, which I usually do at the beginning, but now I think it really fits this context perfectly now in order to build a bridge to the context in Kenya. And you said, and I would like to quote, about 12 years ago, Kenya established a Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission. It was a very arduous process, and it took about 3 years, and came up with a report of findings, recommendations, and a comprehensive reparations framework, none of which has been implemented to date, despite the report having been adopted by Parliament and a restorative justice fund announced by the President. So, Washira, what would you say? Why Kenya has so many problems with really coming to terms with the past, really dealing with the past? Why is it so difficult? What do you think?
I'll start with saying I think there is a problem of impunity. Impunity in the sense that during the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission process in our country, like I said, we had borrowed a lot even from the law in South Africa. And so there were certain components like the amnesty provisions, which are contained in the South African law of the Truth Commission. We actually copied and pasted it, the same word for word from South Africa. And mind you, the South African context is very different from our context. And so what happened to the perpetrators? They were required to tell all about what they did, to face their victims, and to say everything, and then they'll be given amnesty. But now the law was very weak in the sense that the commission did not have absolute powers or very strong powers to deal with those perpetrators who refused to appear before the commission. And for that reason, the presence of the amnesty provision in our law was not proper. It was not necessary. I think the perpetrators should have just been taken directly to a court of law and charged in the court of law. Because at the end of it all, it turned out that our commission became like a victims commission process, victim-led commission, without the perpetrators actually taking a part. And whenever, in the few instances that the perpetrators were we were calling them adversely mentioned persons, when they appeared before the commission, the only thing they could do was to refuse, to deny. And after denying, then that was the end of it. There was nothing, no action which was taken against them. And so it was like a blanket amnesty, which is very painful to victims who know exactly what happened. They feel pained because they have given their story, but the other side, the perpetrator has actually denied what they have said. And now, having said about the presidential State of the Nation address in 2015 and the failure to implement the commission's recommendations has also been very painful to victims, because none of these things has happened. And the main reason is the culture of impunity in this country, whereby people who have violated other people's rights.
Khulu, Mbatha, da würde mich interessieren.
You see, when you deal with issues of truth and justice, they are interlinked with what is happening in the country. And from the victim side, some viewed the perpetrators as having not been entirely accurate with the evidence they gave to the TRC. They felt that they were lying because, remember, the victims, some of the victims are already dead. We're talking now to families, and families have gone through a certain pain, and families have not been told what really happening. Now, when it comes this way, it revokes a lot of anger. And you must remember that we have different languages. Now, when a perpetrator explains and the victim or the relatives of the victim hear this for the first time, they cry. In some instances, we saw Archbishop Desmond Tutu crying. But you see, if you are an interpreter, you don't cry. You reflect as you hear it being said by the perpetrator. Now, this gives a lot of commotion in terms of feelings. Now, you must understand that also the perpetrators happen to be very junior people in the system. Like Waira says, the state was everything that was in front of us. Now, at these hearings, we were dealing with people who were policemen, who were sent. They did not say who sent them to do the things that they were doing. That's why from the victim side, it would therefore appear that there is something that is being hidden. Like some of the conclusions of the TRC was that some of the things they've heard, some of these perpetrators, they must be prosecuted under normal criminal law. Now, not a single case has ever taken place in South Africa. And one of the prominent cases is that of Stephen Bantu Biko. You see, now this is a prominent case. And when the family feels that the perpetrators have still not appeared in a normal criminal court, they feel that it's injustice to what they have gone through. So in other words, as Wahira explained,
würden Sie dann die Frage Wahrheit oder
So
Gerechtigkeit?
the question, truth or justice, what would be your answer? Can you only have one or can you have both?
Both, you see, truth is from whom to whom, and how do I receive it? Justice, justice, it cannot be a once-off act. Remember, this process of the commission is totally different from a traditional court, where a criminal court, where you'll be asked, there is a law in the country, perpetrator has broken the law, and the sentence is this. No, this was totally different. This one is, you ask the perpetrator, can you reveal to us who sent you to do this? Why did you do this? And you rely totally on him, whether he's going to tell you what you will perceive as an open
lie.
A lie, you know. So, and that brings anger. It brings anger to the victim. But there are those families, let me just mention that there were about 20,000 hearings that took place. Out of this, there were about 6,000 cases that the TRC in South Africa said, no, we don't think that the whole truth has been revealed. This must be followed up with investigation. Now, the victims, they look at the state, whether they will do something. The disappointment up to today is that not a single case has been taken up with those cases. And that's why I feel the same, like Wahira says, that you feel now that you were actually as a victim.
Da möchte ich gleich schon vielleicht meine, da möchte ich vielleicht gleich eine.
Now I would like to jump in and ask a final question to you, both of you. So when you say, or just imagine you have three things, three wishes, three tools or instruments you could wish for in order to create truth and justice in your country and to achieve these two things, what do you need? Three tools, three things necessary in order to achieve truth and justice in your country?
I'll give Wahira first.
Okay. Okay, I can go on it. I think what we've always been clamoring as far as that question of the truth is concerned is being offered a genuine apology by the perpetrators or by the state on behalf of the perpetrators. Secondly, we've always been wishing for recognition, and through recognition, some element of justice, some type of justice to be availed to the victims, be it a monetary package, be it a medical support package, be it an education support for, because you'll find that many of the victims were of victims of the state oppression did not take their children to school, and for that reason they fell behind other people. And so as an affirmative action, some kind of justice in terms of helping, an economic package of some kind to help with education and medical facilities. And lastly, we've always been fighting for an acknowledgement of what happened through the establishment of monuments. And these monuments, like for in my case, is what we've been trying to strive for. And after that is done, then we'll have set the basis for reconciling with what happened with our past.
Ja, vielen
I
Dank.
think I'm
Thank
done.
you very much.
Yeah.
Sure,
Ja, ja.
sure. If I may
Die
come in.
Entschuldigung, die Anerkennung und die
Sorry. Okay. You say recognition and places of remembrance.
Yes.
And yeah, Khulu Mbatha, what would be your answer to the question?
Yes, I will link this to what Wahira was said. You see, there are many symbolic gestures that the government showed towards the victims. There are heritage places like the Freedom Park, which was created by government to honor all those who fought for the struggle, all those who contributed, and all those who were victims of national oppression. But as I introduced this topic, and I said, this question is linked to what is happening in society. If there is no improvement in terms of a better life, better education, better working place, this tarnishes the path that reconciliation should take. You see, what was worse with us is that black and white were distinct parts that were embedded in our society. If black people continue to see white people enjoying a better life than them because the economic benefits in society, few of them go to the black people, they still go to white. Then the interpretation also from victims is that this reconciliation is not working. But let me touch another important point of the TRC. The TRC was supposed to address issues of reparation and rehabilitation. Now, rehabilitation is not only for victims. Rehabilitation, yes, for victims will mean a lot. It means those who were tortured, they have to be taken care of, especially health-wise, hospital, and so on. But you see, rehabilitation also applies to the perpetrator. If the victim see in you an attitude that has remained the same like before, then they see that, no, these people have actually not changed from their behavior and their attitude towards us as a community. Now, you must understand that South Africa is a very sophisticated society where we have a very strong working class traditions, the trade unions and so on. So if in a trade union, like in the mining sector, you see that it is still only African people who go underground to do manual work. And you see very few of the other side doing the same. Then you say, no, our situation has not changed. So, as I say, the TRC was
Ich
supposed
danke
to
Ihnen
say,
beiden. Entschuldigung, Khulu
Sorry,
Yes, yes,
sorry,
no problem.
Mbatha.
Yeah. Mm.
I think you made your point very clear. And I would like to thank both of you for the insights you shared with us tonight. I think that both countries and both speakers showed very clearly that the process of transitional justice is faced with numerous challenges again and again. And this is the perfect transition to our final panel in this series. On the 24th of May, we will talk about the topic of transitional justice without end. Perspectives and challenges. So there we will have a wrap up of all the different examples that we were dealing with in this series. I would like to thank Khulu Mbatha and Washira Wahere very much for their participation, for their insights and their thoughts, their experience they shared with us tonight. Unfortunately, Anwar El Sadat was not able to join us, but I am sure that we will have the opportunity to meet on another occasion, maybe even in real life and not only online. I would like to thank all of you, and I thank our interpreters from Echo Konferenzdolmetschen who support our dialogue. And I would like to say thank you very much and have a great evening.